Hey, man!
Oh, hey Charlie. What's up?
What do you got there?
Oh, this? It's Age of Calamity. I've been waiting to play this one.
Does it have multiplayer?
Nope. I mean, I don't think so.
Says here it does. Let's go!
Have you ever wondered what it's like to play a co-op Zelda game with someone who barely knows anything about Zelda lore?
I'm Impa. Was she also in Breath of the Wild?
Someone who needs to look at their controller when you tell them which buttons to press? Then I have good news for you. Since everyone and their mother is streaming or let's playing Age of Calamity, I thought I'd join in on this trend. However, I will not be doing this alone. Together with one of my best friends, Chap.C, we will be playing through the game in co-op mode. So if this is your thing, head over to Chap.C's channel and join this amazing experience in all of its 15 FPS glory. Also, if you like Splatoon, Smash Bros, or anything else Nintendo really, combined with a sprawling personality, give this man a sub. You will regret it, but Chap.C doesn't care. He just wants your attention. Yeah, I said it, Charlie. You f***. Love you, buddy. So, Age of Calamity. That was quite a ride, wasn't it? After completing the game's story and most side quests, I think it's time to give my actual, unfiltered opinion on the game. A couple of things up front. Know that I enjoyed this game a great deal. I have plenty of positives, but also a fair amount of criticisms on it, both of which will be mentioned and addressed. I also want to quickly say that I'm leaving out any negatives in terms of technical or performance issues. The reason being is that I think that the lion's share of these issues are not to be blamed on the game, but rather the Switch itself being underpowered. So let's start with gameplay. The gameplay is good. I mean, it's still a Musou game, of course, which is predominantly known for its straightforward hack and slash style. But it's cool to see that the game actually made Koei Tecmo step outside of its own comfort zone with things like the Divine Beast sections, something you don't find in your average Warriors game. At the same time, I can also understand those who decided to skip the game because they aren't fans of the hack and slash genre. Although the combat is more flashy and fluent, it definitely pales in comparison to the freeform and creative combat found in Breath of the Wild. But I think that there's enough for most people to get through the main story and enjoy the gameplay all the way to the end. Mainly due to the variety of weapons to use, characters to take control of, and upgrading your gear and your combos. Sure, if you only stick to Link throughout the entirety of the main campaign, yeah, it definitely will get stale at some point since there's only so many enemies to fight and combinations and moves to perform. So I would definitely advise to switch it up and try out different characters and weapons as you go. It's how Musou games are generally meant to be played. They give you a ton of options to play around and experiment with. I know some people feel disappointed that there wasn't a lot of exploration in the game, but to be honest, those people probably didn't know what these types of games are. If you are familiar with the Warriors franchise, that expectation wouldn't have been there. I've even seen some people who confused Age of Calamity with the sequel to Breath of the Wild. And yeah, if you approach the game with that misconception, I totally get why it seemed disappointing. But don't worry, Breath of the Wild 2 is still a thing, it's coming, someday. Lastly, I will say that for the average completionist out there, the game will provide plenty of stuff to do outside of the main story. You got your weapons to collect, plenty of extra characters to unlock, Korok seeds to find, God help us all, and just, well, look at how much stuff there is to do in terms of side missions. Not to mention a pretty extensive post-game trying to reassemble Terraco. While again, the missions don't provide the greatest variety, it's enough to give the game a good runtime. But as I said before, if all this stuff isn't really your cup of tea and you're just here for the story, I definitely recommend skipping this one and just watching the cutscenes here on YouTube. Speaking of which, let's talk about the story, because I have a lot to say. Now before we get into the actual narrative, I will just say that this is by far the biggest and most epic story ever depicted in a Zelda game. And this is mainly due to the presentation. The game is filled with these hell yeah moments where you just get totally invested in what's going on screen. Moments like when Hyrule's army stands on the fields of Central Hyrule, all races united, is something I've been wanting to see in a Zelda game for a long time. It genuinely gave me goosebumps. Overall, the cutscenes are simply done very well, with a great mix of epic, touching, and comedic moments sprinkled across the story missions. One of the key elements to the cutscenes feeling a lot better than in any of the mainline games is that the characters are much more lively, expressive, and given even more of a personality than they had previously, which leads into another thing that Age of Calamity greatly improves upon: the voice acting. In Breath of the Wild, the voice acting was very hit or miss. Sometimes it was good, sometimes okay, and other times just not good. Which is why the game really surprised me, since most, if not all of the old cast from Breath of the Wild made a return coupled with some new additions. I'm very happy that they went for this already established cast and gave them another chance to bring these characters to life. Because man, the improvements are so noticeable. For example, just listen to the difference in Yunobo's voice between games.
Monsters! They're here! They found me! Help! Huh? No! Don't worry about that! I'm here to help!
It's night and day, and can I just say, what a job well done by Joe Hernandez. If I didn't know that Daruk and Yunobo had the same voice actor, I would have never guessed. Big props to him for being able to portray two characters with such radically different voices. I mean, he's basically having a conversation with himself here. As for the rest of the old cast, I was definitely feeling it a lot more this time around. Impa was great, especially since she didn't sound like a young woman trying to do an old woman's voice this time. Being able to play a younger character definitely made her shine a lot more, and I'd say she did a good job. Revali and Urbosa were already good in Breath of the Wild, and they are great here as well. Even characters like Mipha and Zelda, both of which I wasn't really the biggest fan of in Breath of the Wild in terms of voice acting, managed to convince me a lot more here. And of course we cannot forget King Rome, who really brought it home for me.
Here, now, go forth, and be brave for your kingdom!
Hearing him put on this mighty, thunderous voice during his speech at the beginning was amazing, and I also really liked having him as the main story narrator in between missions. But the ones who really stole the show for me were the new additions to the cast. Aster, Koga, and Suga were just totally spot on. I love the over-the-top Disney villain-esque performance given by Aster, and Koga and Suga really complemented each other. Koga being the sly, deceptive, yet silly leader, and Suga representing the more serious and dangerous side of the Yiga clan. Sure, not all performances were as memorable, but none of them stuck out as flat-out bad. Also, did Riju change accent between games?
Seems you have something rather interesting there.
We've come so far. We must persevere until the battle is done.
And although they didn't play as big of a role as I thought they would, Robbie and Pura's voices were also very satisfying. All of this also really highlights the missed opportunity Breath of the Wild had when it came to its story. Although being a very different game, I think it definitely could have used cutscenes of this caliber. And I genuinely hope that Nintendo will carry this part of Age of Calamity through in Breath of the Wild too. I mean, can you imagine Ganondorf with a voice on par or even better than that of Koga, Suga, and Aster? It would be magical. But enough about that, it's time to talk about the actual narrative. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when I first finished the main campaign, I felt like the story was a total cop-out. As someone who's been looking forward to seeing the story of the Calamity play out ever since the announcement of the game, yeah, I really felt like they danced around the brutal aspects of the event. In retrospect, however, the story has managed to grow on me over time, and in hindsight, I get why Nintendo chose to go this route with the narrative. Now, you might think I'm just fanboying here and being biased by giving the story a pass, but I can assure you that this is not the case. I mean, I literally made an entire series illustrating how the events of the Calamity played out, and predicting how and where they could add gameplay sections. If there's anyone who wanted to see the true story of 100 years ago, it's me. But I'm also reasonable enough to realize that we may have just been a bit too naive thinking they would actually depict a horrific event like this in a Zelda game. Spin-off or not, this is still a Nintendo game we're talking about, and the actual events of the Calamity as we know it in Breath of the Wild is just really dark. We're talking genocide here. Towns and civilians getting obliterated by the thousands with no help of salvation. It's one thing to recount a story like this and another to actually show it. And aside from that, I can also understand that they may have ran into some massive hurdles in terms of the gameplay. How do you make an enjoyable game where you end up losing in the end? Characters you invested so much time in, leveling them up and upgrading their equipment, suddenly not being playable anymore because they died? I'm pretty sure we all have our own ideas and suggestions, but it can't have been easy. That being said, I do understand that some people may have felt misled by Nintendo's marketing of the game, and I will admit that they didn't exactly make it clear from the very get-go that this was not actually going to be the events of the Calamity as we know it in Breath of the Wild. In fact, they made it sound like that was actually the case and not an alternate version of events. Which is a perfect segue into one of my biggest gripes with the narrative, the inclusion of time travel. Now, I don't necessarily dislike time travel. In fact, some of my favorite movies and series feature it in some shape or form. But I would be lying if I said that I haven't grown a bit tired of time travel as a plot device. I've just seen it happen too many times at this point. Anytime something terrible happens, something tragic that seems irreversible, boom, time travel. I don't much care for the fact that the series as a whole has to deal with another timeline split. In fact, I've never cared that much for the timeline in general. I acknowledge its existence and I do bring it up from time to time as it's unavoidable, but I'm generally more interested in the mysteries and the secrets which are more contained to one specific game. And heck, we don't even know if there's gonna be any sequels to Age of Calamity's timeline, so it might be just a one-time offshoot. My biggest problems with time travel is that A, it takes away any meaning of consequence. Why should I care about some tragic event taking place if I know in the back of my mind that time travel is always an option? And B, time travel is such an intangible concept from the perspective of real-life logic and reason, it tends to turn a narrative into a complete mess when you really start to think more about it, and brings about stuff like the Song of Storms paradox and other inconsistencies. Here are some examples of some of the stuff that went through my mind while playing Age of Calamity. Okay, so Link doesn't have the Master Sword yet, but I thought creating a champion said that he got it when he was like 12 or 13 years old. Did he just not get the sword in this timeline? No, but wait, that doesn't make sense. If Terraco caused a split in the timeline at the moment he arrived in the past, everything that took place before his arrival has to be a carbon copy of Breath of the Wild's timeline. That's how timelines work. It's not until he arrives and starts changing the outcome that events start diverging. So does this mean that this part of creating a champion is now not canon? Or did they just retcon it to fit the gameplay? Oh wow, they brought back the future champions from Breath of the Wild? Aside from the question of how Terraco, the gods, or whoever is making this happen knows how to do this, how are they not the least bit shocked about it? They just got ripped from their own reality, only to pop up in a different one, in the middle of a fight to the death nonetheless. Speaking of which, how do they know exactly what to do as soon as they jump out of the portal? Were they stuck in limbo for a while and someone had to fill them in? Like, alright Yunobo, I know this is very weird and you're probably in shock right now, but I'm gonna need you to do exactly as I say, alright? So any moment now you're gonna be transported right in front of a massive laser beam heading straight for you and your ancestor Daruk. Oh yeah, he's still alive in this reality, by the way. Now you're gonna have to activate your magic shield thingy right as you arrive. Don't hesitate for even a second, or both Daruk and you will die a horrible fiery death. You got it? Now that I think about it, where were the new champions when they got ripped from their own timeline anyway? Can you imagine if one of them was in the bathroom at that moment? Or sleeping? Now, aside from the whole time travel aspect, there are some other moments that just have me scratching my head. Moments where I just have to ask how or why. As an example.
The blood moon rises. Ganon's magic waxes strongest now. The monsters who roam the land, their souls have returned to them.
How do you know that? No, seriously, how do you know that? As far as we know, the Blood Moon first appeared during or after the Calamity, and Ganon himself had been completely forgotten about. Nobody knows what he is, what he can do, or even what he looks like. How does she know what effects the moon has, and what it does to monsters? Did she get some sort of divine knowledge after awakening her power? If so, then why did she not see the Blood Moon coming? Why does she not know the solution to many other issues transpiring after her awakening? Like Purah being able to activate the Sheikah Towers again. And that's another thing. I like that Purah ends up being a crucial part to the solution and all, but the way it's written just comes off as lazy. It's the typical hacker trope. I managed to decrypt the code and get past the firewalls and other computer talk. She's just like, hey, remember when I said we couldn't teleport many people at once yet, just a few days ago? Well, not only did I hack the firewall and do sciencey stuff to take back control of the central unit at the castle, but I can also teleport entire armies now and even mechs the size of skyscrapers. And don't worry, I've already informed all of Hyrule that I'm able to do this while you were busy, so they will all be in battle positions once I hit the teleport button.
Yes, science!
Okay, alright Nintendo, no, just no. We all know Link is a powerful and agile dude, but he's still a mortal being made of flesh and blood. The man would pulverize his entire arm and probably every other bone in his body trying to pull this stunt. Why couldn't he have just pushed Zelda out of the way or something? I mean, damn Link! Earlier in the story, he gets hit on the shield with a boulder breaker and he flies like 20 feet through the air into a wall. But a solid stone ceiling block 20 times his size? No biggie.
Link, what are you doing? We have to hurry. The castle, it's about to collapse.
No worries, princess. Check this out.
Oh wow, that actually worked.
Yeah. There are some more of these little moments spurred throughout the story where I just can't ignore what I'm seeing, either because I know the established lore, it's way too convenient as a plot device, or because it's just physically impossible even within the fictional world of Zelda. Now obviously I am nitpicking here, and hey, maybe we're not supposed to think about this stuff too much, and none of these points ultimately ruined the experience for me by any means. But I do think it's fair to be critical of a story and not just praise it. Many of the negatives I've covered probably won't bother the average player, or even be noticed by anyone aside from those who are very knowledgeable and invested in Zelda lore. But even purely from a storytelling perspective, there were definitely some things lacking. I think that Aster, for instance, could have been fleshed out more. It would have been nice to know why he does what he does. Was he the fortune teller who uttered the prophecy? Where did he get the orb? Why is he wearing Gerudo clothing and where did he get them? I also think they could have been a little bit more clear about the fact that Ganon's malice corrupted the present-day Terraco when it followed future Terraco into the portal. Not everything has to be explained in detail, but I can definitely see why some people were confused about this part of the narrative. A little cutscene showing the malice taking him over and Harbinger then approaching Aster for the first time and showing him the future would have gone a long way. Anyway, as not to end on a negative note, I will conclude with the music. The music kicks many asses, including mine. What is there to say? They took the best and the most memorable tracks, which were already good in Breath of the Wild, and put them on steroids. These epic renditions are just masterful. Some of my favorites being the Divine Beast remixes, the theme songs of Rivali and Mipha, Zelda's Awakening, and of course a fair share of brand new tracks, which all sound great as well. They really outdid themselves here, and frankly, there isn't much to say other than a job well done. For those who thought Breath of the Wild lacked music, just put on the OST to Age of Calamity next time you're playing that game. In conclusion, though in no way as amazing or groundbreaking as Breath of the Wild, I think Age of Calamity is still a nice addition to the series. For a game that came out of nowhere and was released so quickly thereafter, it really gave me a fun experience to hold me over until the next installment. And it was great to revisit this world again and see it in a different light. Getting to see the towns and settlements still in their prime, paired with some fast-paced action and an engaging story. A story which in and of itself is also harmless, since in the larger scheme of things it doesn't invalidate or hurt the lore established by Breath of the Wild. With the exception of the Master Sword bit I mentioned earlier, but that was only given a backstory in creating a champion, which was written by a third party nonetheless. Other than that, it doesn't change the events of said game. It might have an impact on Breath of the Wild 2's story, but we'll just have to wait and see if that will be the case and to what extent. Age of Calamity is not for everyone, but then again, what game really is? Before we close the curtains, I have a few things to note. First off, if you haven't been following my community updates, my Discord is now up and running. We are rapidly moving towards 400 members, but there's always room for more. So come on down and join the maze. Next up, a big thanks to Sam Stallings for redesigning my channel thumbnail. Something he did out of his own volition. Both me and the community on Discord really dig it, and I immediately decided to update it in my branding. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons and my channel members, of which M Phoenix and Morgie T have recently joined the cause. Thank you so much. And lastly, of course, a big thanks to Chap.C for joining me in the skit at the beginning of the video. We had a lot of fun making this one.
Yeah, here. Okay.
George, ik ken acteur. Ken Tom Cruise. Nee.
I hope to see you all in the next video. This is Don signing off, and have a good one.